How are you doing today, class? My name is Edwards-Saliu, and today we're going to talk about Mark and Matthew. So if we're going to talk about the books Mark and Matthew, we also have to recognize Luke. These three books in the Bible help develop the story of Christ, and they're also very much alike. They tell Christ's story in almost similar ways. They sometimes even use the same words, and because of that, they're called the Synoptic Gospels, which in Greek can be translated to see together. So when we look at the book of Matthew, we understand it is the first book of the New Testament. It also aids by creating a link between the Old Testament and the New Testament through its content which is found in it. It is also known to be written by Matthew between the time of 50 AD and 70 AD. Matthew is very important because it emphasizes Jesus' identity and also his teachings. Matthew referred to the Old Testament more than 60 times in order to 1. Claim Jesus as a royal son of David, 2. Claim Jesus as the King of Jews, and 3. To claim Jesus as fulfilling the messianic prophecies. In a lot of Matthew's writings, Jesus is revealed as not just a prophet or a regular teacher, but as a very Son of God, who will one day sit on his throne in heaven and judge all the nations. This emphasis on Jesus' identity is what made the Gospel of Matthew very useful in demonstrating to Jews that this was their long-awaited Messiah, the ones that their prophets had foretold for many years. So not only does Matthew show emphasis in Jesus' identity, but he also emphasizes Jesus' teachings. In fact, more than half of Matthew are Jesus' teachings. And in Matthew 5 through 7, we witness the Sermon on the Mount. So in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus explores a lot of different teachings and topics, such as the Beatitudes, loving thy enemies, forgiveness, prayer, or more specifically the Lord's Prayer, fasting, and also trusting God and not in material wealth. In Matthew 22, verses 37 through 40, Jesus gives us two of the greatest commandments. That is to love God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and to also love one's neighbor as yourself. He explains that all other commandments are rooted in these principles of loving one another. Matthew also includes many of Jesus' parables. In Matthew 13, we hear about the parable of the sower, the parable of the weeds, and the parable of the mustard seeds, each of which illustrates different aspects of the kingdom of heaven. These parables often teach us about faith, growth, judgment, and also God's grace. Another parable that we see in Matthew comes from Matthew chapter 18, verses 21 through 35, which is the parable of the unforgiving servant. Jesus uses this parable to emphasize how that just as God forgave us, we are to forgive others. This theme of forgiveness is a reoccurring theme that we're going to see happen more and more in Matthew. There are many more teachings of Jesus that Matthew describes, but all in all, they focus on love, humility, and also forgiveness. And overall, living a life focused on spiritual values and compassion for others. So now as we transition to the book of Mark, we see the importance of the emphasis on Jesus' ministry and how it dives into it more thoroughly. Mark also shows how Christ obediently fulfilled his mission as an obedient and diligent servant of God. As we examine Mark a little bit closer, we see that the author is believed to be John Mark, who is the cousin of Barnabas and also a close associate of the Apostle Peter. Mark is also the young man who went with Paul and Barnabas on their first missionary journey. Peter often referred to Mark as his son, which was a way to show affection. It's quite likely that Mark's gospel represents the eyewitness reports of Peter, whose preaching and life Mark was well acquainted with, so that makes a lot of sense, honestly. Mark himself may also have been there to be present at some of the occasions that he describes in this book. So as we examine the book of Mark, we see a depiction of Jesus' life as an active servant. In contrast to the books of Matthew and Luke, we see no record of Christ's genealogy. This is because we want to focus more on Jesus' life as a servant. And the family history of a servant is not that important, honestly. Mark also emphasized is indicated in other ways as well. we see 18 records of miracles happening in the book of Mark. Mark also put emphasis on Christ carrying out his mission with zeal and purpose. The word ethos, or immediately, straight away, or at once, appears 42 times in the book of Mark. This word indicates the promptness and willingness that Christ had to serve people. Mark's use of the word in several of his accounts also demonstrates the fact that Christ was hastening towards the goal of his life of service. He told his disciples that the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and give his life as a ransom for many. You see that in Mark 10, verse 45. So that's all I have for you guys today. I just want to say I appreciate y'all for watching my video, and thank you.